Welcome back to The Pen Man. I'm Mike West, and today I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to take a pause from my pen reviews just to go over some reasons why I use a fountain pen and why I think you should use or think about using a fountain pen. Well, first of all, let me give you a little brief history on how I came to use fountain pens. A few years ago, I don't know if I was getting on my wife's nerves or not, but I remember her suggesting that I get a hobby. What kind of hobby was I going to get? Well, along that same time, I'd been looking for a pen that I could use with my songwriting. I play acoustic guitar and I write my own little songs. I don't publish anything, but just for my own enjoyment. And I wanted a pen that was made of the same kind of wood that my guitar was made from. The back and sides of my guitar are made of rosewood, and so I wanted a pen with rosewood. It just seemed kind of fitting for writing my songs. I found a really inexpensive ballpoint pen online, the kind with you can get your name on it, and it comes in a little wooden box and all that. Pretty cool, but when I got it, I was a little disappointed because I don't know, it just seemed cheap. I was let down. The wood wasn't what I was expecting, but I still used it. However, while in the process of looking for that pen, in my Google searches, I started seeing these advertisements for this one company called Penn State Industries. They make a lot of pen making equipment and provide supplies and so forth. And so I thought, when my wife suggested I get a hobby, I thought, well, maybe I should look into making pens and I can make my own rosewood pen. So moving on from there, I did end up making myself a rosewood pen. I started making more pens. It was just fun. You have your lathe and some other equipment, and you're taking these little chunks of wood or acrylic and you're making them into lovely pens. And it got to the point where I ended up setting up an Etsy shop. I no longer have that shop, but set up an Etsy shop, was selling pens through there as well. Well, in the process of making pens and buying pen materials to make the pens, to assemble the pens, I got curious about a fountain pen, because with the supplies, they offer you have roller balls, you have ballpoints, a couple different kinds of ballpoints, the Parker style and the cross style. And then a lot of the kits had a fountain pen option. And it just made me wonder why. I had never even considered using a fountain pen in my life. The only time I had ever seen a fountain pen really and held one was when I was about 8 years old or so. My mom had one in her purse, and I just thought it was kind of interesting. She had the little cartridge, and I don't know what kind of fountain pen it was, but I thought, well, that's pretty interesting. But I didn't think anybody but people signing important documents used fountain pens. Well, come to be that is just not the case. A lot of people are using fountain pens. And I did a survey through the other Etsy crafts people. How many of them use fountain pens? And to my surprise, there was a lot. And in particular, how many of them that lived in the United States? Because I figured over in Europe, Japan, they would use fountain pens. But here in the United States, and that's where most of my customers live, who would be interested in a fountain pen? But a lot of them were. And so I took one pen because I bought one kit just out of curiosity. And it was much like this pen here. This is not the pen, but it was same style, just a different type of wood. And this is, I believe it's box elder, it's dyed. And anyway, it has a number 5 nib in it. And I thought, well, you know what? I'm gonna put the cartridge, because it came with a cartridge. I'm gonna put that in there, and I'm gonna see how this thing writes. And sure enough, I love the way it felt. So I started researching more pens, and I thought, well, you know, could I make quality pens? What are the other pens like? And so I ended up buying a Kaweco Sport pen, and I liked it. I liked it a lot. It was handy to carry around. Took it on a vacation, and just never got in the way. It was kind of fun to write with. And then I splurged. That was my first fountain pen, manufactured fountain pen. And then my second one was a Diplomat Excellence A Evergreen. I bought that. I loved it, and I was sold. I was sold on fountain pens. And so I started buying some more, and not just buying some, because I'll show you my collection at some other point, but also making some for myself. And actually, for me, it helped me in my creativity to learn how to make something based on my knowledge of pen turning, but also take that knowledge and make something a little different than what you would get just buying a kit. And so it sent me down the road, so I've expanded there. And that's how I got into fountain pens. And my love for them, my appreciation for what they do for me, what they do for my writing, encouraging me to write and so forth, caused me to want to do pen reviews. I appreciate some of the other people that are out there doing pen reviews, and I just want to give my perspective as well. One of the questions is, why don't more people use fountain pens? And I think a lot of it is just lack of knowledge. In some cases it may be knowledge, but knowledge that is based on history that goes back decades into the 50s and 60s and so forth, when fountain pens were a little more messy, if you will. In fact, that's one of the reasons why people say, I don't want to use a fountain pen. They're kind of messy, aren't they? Well, they can be. They can be. I have my not Cliff notes. I don't know who Cliff is, and I assure you he doesn't write for me. So these are just Mike's notes. So it's too messy. Too messy. The ink, it takes longer to dry. Let's see. Water smears the ink, and I get those inky fingers. And all of these can be true, but they don't have to be, or they're at least not near as bad as what it seems like they might be. You know, for instance, with the mess, they're not messy if you're careful. And that's all it is just handling anything with care. You know, you don't throw your pen around and let it roll off the desk and all of that. And you just take general care. You don't have to treat it like it's going to bust apart, fragile, if you just handle it and drop it just a little bit. But you just take care of it. Make sure it's not going to roll around. You're not dropping it and so forth. Most inks, as far as people are afraid of spilling ink and staining their clothes or their carpet or other materials that are absorbent, if you buy the right inks, and a lot of fountain pen inks nowadays are water-based. They're not like the old iron gall, what they call iron gall, that had more of a permanence to it. those are available, not just iron gall, but there are inks that are available that do give more permanence, because sometimes you might want that. But for general journal writing and so forth, you really don't need that. And so I've spilt ink, little droplets. I haven't poured stuff, and that's what I'm saying. You got to be careful. There is care. But I've dropped it on, like my pen, kind of on my desk, and it might get a couple little splatter drops. They wipe right up. A little bit of water, and boom, they're gone. It washes out of clothing, most of your clothing. Now, I'm not saying it every time. I'm just saying, just be careful. But you don't have to feel like you can't use these things. Okay, so it's like any other thing that might be messy. If you like to paint or draw, you got to be careful with that stuff too, right? Pens don't drip ink like they used to too. That's kind of a common thing. You remember seeing in cartoons or whatever, where somebody takes this fountain pen and the idea of fountain, and you get this big old ink splat there. It doesn't work quite that well. Quite that way. You can, if you toss your pen like that, you can get some ink to kind of pump out of there if you want. But why are you going to do that, right? All right. So it's not going to, like, if you just hold it up or take it out and you're sitting there, it's not going to just start dripping. I've never had it happen to me, and I've used a variety of brands of fountain pens, including the ones that I make, and I've never had that happen. Okay, so what about the high maintenance, cleaning it, inking it up, so forth? It takes a little bit of time. Now, I usually use 5 different pens at a time. I have 5 different colors I use for 5 days of the week, and the other 2 days I use one of the 5. It's just my thing. I have a blue, I have a black, I have a red, green, and brown. So, and when I'm done with those usually for the usage that I have, that'll last me a month. And then I go through the process. Now, that's 5 pens. So if you're just using one pen all the time, it's really not that bad. And you don't have to clean it out if you're using the same ink. You don't have to clean it out near as often as you think. You just, you're using the same ink. So, maybe once every 2 or 3 months, you might want to clean it out a little bit. But that's about it. And filling it's not hard. I'll do a video on that as well, cleaning and filling. It's not that hard. You just dip it in, you pump it up, you take a paper towel, you wipe off the excess, and boom, you're good to go for however long, let's say a week and a half of using this one cartridge or converter full of ink. Okay, so it's not that bad. All right, so another objection to fragile, they can be. You don't want to drop that nib on the floor, because it can be, get bent, and then you gotta replace the nib. So that's legitimate. But again, you're just being careful. Just being careful how you use your pen, where you set it on your desk, and all of that. And these most nibs are replaceable, and so just be careful, okay? But that is legitimate. That is legitimate concern. Now, on that, I've also dropped a Bic stick, those little crystals that most of us have used in school, and I ended up, not purposely, but ended up dropping it on the ground, and I couldn't use the thing because the little ball somehow got dented. So it can happen to even cheap ball pens. So of course they're easier to replace. Okay. Let's see. Too fragile. And lastly, who writes with, or who writes anymore? Who uses any kind of writing utensil anymore? I mean, we're all keyboarding, right? Texting and emailing and doing all of our documents online. And I mean, who writes? Actually, you'd be surprised. More people write than what what you know of. Even people, even when you're writing say a paper for school or a report for work, I mean, sometimes you'll type it out. A lot of authors have done that. You've all seen the little pictures of the author hunched over his typewriter or her typewriter, and they're just going at it. And so sometimes that is the case. But I found that I think better when I actually write out. Now, I still do some texting. I still send out emails. Of course, just basic communication and regular communications to people, clubs, organizations, teachers, and so forth. You're going to have to do that, and thankfully we have that option. But when I write a message, for instance, when I deliver that message, it's always on a printed page. I type it up into my computer and I print it out because it's easier for me to read. But when I'm writing that message, I write longhanded. It just helps me think better. So there's a lot of reasons to write. It really helps, and studies have shown that it helps your thought process. It kind of slows you down a little bit. I mean, sometimes it's good just to, just to get the idea out there, and you can still do that with a tactile pen, analog writing, if you will. You can still do all that. What about notes? We need to write more notes. I get convicted because I don't write more notes. We need to write more notes to people. Even if you don't send them in the mailbox, maybe it's somebody at work that you want to encourage, somebody at school that you just want to encourage. And you find a note card, and you can find so many cool note cards. Online people are very crafty, and they're making all kinds. You don't have to just get the American greetings and the Hallmark cards and so forth. You can get some really unique note cards that speak you, right? And just write out a note. It means so much more than just getting an email or a text. I mean, that's better than nothing. But when somebody gets a note card from you, say, hey, I'm thinking about you, I'm praying for you, I'm here to help, to talk to, and so forth. We need to do that more. And when you're writing, that obviously you write longhand, and that just means more. When they see that you have taken the time and effort to make this pen, it just means so much more. Okay, so those are some arguments why people don't use fountain pens, and I've tried to answer those objections to a degree. The list can go on, but now how about some of the positives? What are some good positives? Is that a double positive? Good positives. What are some of the advantages to writing for one thing, and then especially fountain pens? Well, fountain pens can be eco-friendly. You buy one pen, and that's the pen you carry it around with you, and you use it, and you keep filling it, and you keep using it, keep filling it, keep using it. And which, by the way, some people say, well, they're awfully expensive. I'd be afraid of losing one. That's legitimate, but there are some inexpensive options. And in my reviews, I'm going to be reviewing some very inexpensive fountain pen options. So they don't have to be expensive, but they can be very eco-friendly because they're refillable. And so you don't keep tossing these Bic sticks or Uniballs or other kind of, when a pen is cheap, you don't really care about it, and it just floats and it goes around wherever, it ends up in the trash. And if you're very environmentally conscious, A lot of people are, obviously the plastics are a big deal. So it cuts down on that. That's one positive, right? Okay, here's another E, economical. Okay, so if you're not having to, if you buy an inexpensive fountain pen and you buy an inexpensive bottle of ink, your favorite color, let me tell you, a bottle of ink will last you a long time. So you buy one pen instead of multiple packs of pens, because you have to buy multiple packs because these things are cheap, so you don't really keep track of them that much. They end up wherever, you run out, where do they go? You go to the store, you buy another pack of 5 or 10 pens and go through that, and you have all the waste with the packaging of that and so forth. So they can be very economical in that you're not having to buy a lot of pens, and you don't have to, you have the pen and the ink, and they last. So spending less money on writing utensils. How about ergonomical? I still have those images of being in school with those big sticks, the crystals, what we call the crystals, those clear big, and I used to always wonder if I was going to actually keep this pen long enough to get it, to empty out the little ink cartridge inside there. But writing with it, they're so thin, and to get a line, you have to apply more pressure and so forth. Boy, at the end of the day, your hand is really, and if you're writing for long periods, writing a book report or a term paper or a report for work, boy, it just gets old. And so you don't have to see the fountain pens. They come with they're a wider girth. In other words, their grip is larger. And a lot of people appreciate that, especially if you have arthritis. So it's easier to write in that respects. There are a few fountain pens, like this one here has a pretty thin grip. But because of the flow of a fountain pen, you're not having to press down that hard either, and so you're not having to grip it as hard. So I mean, really, even a thin fountain pen, it just kind of rests in my hand. I mean, as long I keep it from slipping down like that, but it just kind of rests in my hand as I write. And if it's a quality pen that has good flow and so forth, and like I said, even cheap or inexpensive pens can have good flow, then you hardly have to touch the paper, it seems like sometimes. And so there's not that pressure that you're having to write with. What about variety? Oh, there's all kinds of different kinds of varieties of pens that you'll never see other people use. I mean, you will be unique. And as you look at the different pen reviews, you'll find those. I mean, I got a Diplomat Aero here, and I'll do a review on this one sometime soon, and it's a beautiful pen. Who has a pen that looks like that? All right, like a Zeppelin blimp. So you have that variety. And inks, you have, oh man, the amount of inks. I mean, you can go to a store and get a nice, pretty nice writing ballpoint, like a Uniball or a roller ball of some sort, and and it might be pretty decent. I'm not saying that none of those can be good, and don't throw out all your ballpoints. I still carry oftentimes a ballpoint with me because, quite frankly, there are still times where you need a ballpoint. But what you can't get in just going to the store and buying pens off the shelf is a variety of inks. And typically, you're going to use a black or blue ink in a lot of your writing, but what about some reds and some greens? I like darker more saturated, they call them more saturated inks, and more earth tone type. And sure enough, I could find them. You know, if all I could find was these bright greens, for instance, I mean, I do use a bright green from time to time, but I really like those forest greens, those earthy moss greens. And I can find that in a fountain pen. And there's so many different manufacturers of the ink, and you don't have to buy a different pen. That's what's really cool. If you change a color, or especially an ink brand, you know, you flush it out. That's not hard to do. You just refill it with this new ink, and it's like cool. And so you have that, and so you have that variety. Plus nibs. What about you know, if you like writing fine point, or maybe you want a medium point, or maybe what's called a stub nib, you know, that kind of makes it look like you're writing calligraphy. You can, a lot of pen manufacturers, with their nibs, you're able to swap those out. You buy another nib to keep around, because maybe you want to write a fancy note, and you want that wider, that kind of calligraphic look to it. And so you take out the old nib, you put in the new nib. Of course, all that you gotta take care of how you do it, but you can do it, and it's not that hard. So you have that kind of variety. Okay. Now some say one of the advantages is that it helps you to write neater. I'm not so certain about that, because my handwriting will still look pretty similar. I mean, when I write with a ballpoint, and if I pick up a fountain pen, it basically looks the same. So there's not that promise that, oh yeah, I get a fountain pen, man, it's going to look like the signers of the Constitution, or some fancy calligraphy writer. Not necessarily. In fact, not at all. Your handwriting will still look the same. Now, I will say that with what I call a stub nib, and there's different widths. They're kind of a flat, and you know, as you write, come down on it, it's a little wider, and then if you go across, it's a little thinner because of the way the nib's designed. You can do that, and that will help, but really, if it helps at all, it's because with a fountain pen, if you're encouraged, because of the pleasantness of the writing experience, you're encouraged to write more. And therefore, the more you write, the more practice you get, and in that way, your writing improves. Now, that can happen with a ballpoint, but the problem with some ballpoints, like the big sticks, you know, you're only writing when you have to, because it's not a real pleasurable experience. But when you get a nice fountain pen in your hand and you start writing in your journal or a report, you know, it's just so nice to write with, writing cards and so forth. It's just so pleasant. So that would encourage you to write more, and then you're going to be more interested in writing and writing nicer, and so you're going to learn, like I have to. I've tried to improve my distinction between my L's and my T's. I'm one of those weird people that still write cursive, to where my T's aren't looped, that they just go up and down and so forth. So I'm trying to be more aware of that, and so as I'm writing, I'm getting better at doing my T's. So my writing is improving in that regard. Okay, what's next? Encourages more writing. It kind of goes along with something I said about the writing eater. It does. When the writing experience is more pleasurable, when the pen you're writing with is cooler, you're more apt to write more. You start getting into, you say, man, I want to write more notes. Start a journal, even if it's just basically what's the weather today and your thoughts and so forth. Journals are really good because really does help you to write out your thoughts, to think your thoughts. And so it does encourage you, there's another E, to write more in that regards. All right, how about they're just plain cool. Going along with what I said earlier, who has a pen like this? I mean, most people don't have a pen like this. And I can carry this pen. I have a leather sleeve that I use, and I keep it in my pocket. You know, of course, it will clip to your pocket, and you're walking around with a pen like this. I mean, that says something about you. You have some uniqueness to you, right? And so you pull that pen out. Let's see, where do I sign? And then you you write it out. And people, I've had people, oh, that's a nice pen. Wow, that's pretty cool. So it's just, you know, not to make you big-headed or anything, but it's just cool. It's just cool to have a fountain pen, to say that you use a fountain pen. You're able to pull that fountain pen out and use it. And just for me, I like pulling it out and use it. And again, going back to how I got hooked and that first experience that I had writing with just as one of these pens that I made, was as I put the nib to paper and I started writing, and just the flow. It is cool. It's smooth. There's some therapeutics. It can be very therapeutic. And as you're writing, it doesn't have to be tense. And so my friends, I really encourage you, if you don't already use a fountain pen, check out some of my videos on some fountain pens, inexpensive fountain pens, and subscribe to the channel, because I will be putting up some more reviews, because you really do need to look at some reviews of fountain pens to see what other people say about them. Not all fountain pens I probably wouldn't recommend, but most of them I probably could, but for different reasons. And so you want to make sure that the fountain pen that you buy is one that is going to fit your style and your needs. But I encourage you to get into it. And for those of you who are using fountain pens, who are getting into it, oh, just enjoy the ride. And thank you for tuning in to The Pen Man to learn more about the pen, the fountain pen experience. And again, check out these two videos here for a couple of the reviews that I have done. And the one is the Pilot Metropolitan, a very good starter fountain pen. They're not that expensive, and they write really well. I was impressed the first time I used one of those. All right, thank you. You guys have a great day.